All right. Hello. Welcome in to Believe in Steelers. We are powered by FanDuel. Steelers will travel to Detroit to take on the Lions in week 16. And what is a game that, while in the grand scheme of things, could end up not meaning a whole lot, should they win on Sunday, they get that much closer to clinching the AFC North. So we'll talk about everything that could happen on Sunday right here on Believe in Steelers. So if you're watching on YouTube, please be sure to subscribe. If you are listening as a podcast, be sure to comment, subscribe, follow along with the show, all that good stuff. The big news coming into, literally, 20 minutes ago, Nick Herbig officially ruled out. That's on top of TJ Watt being ruled out. So their top two edge rushers, both gone. And now it's going to come down to, can Alex Highsmith get consistent pressure as the number one guy? They called up Jeremiah Moon. So it's very all hands on deck type situation behind these two guys that are out. Going to be a heavy dose of Alex Highsmith and Jack Sawyer against the Lions. And frankly speaking, it's not a world you want to live in if you are the Steelers. Without Nick Herbig, who's been their best edge rusher this season, without TJ Watt, who, historically, his resume speaks for itself. Even if he hasn't had a year that we've grown accustomed to seeing from him this season, not having him on the field against Detroit, not where you want to be. And so defensively already, the Steelers are at a handicap. Now, Derek Harmon, rookie defensive tackle, has played great this season. He is back in the lineup. So you get a little bit of help on the interior next to Cam Hayward and Keanu Benton to try to slow down the run game of the Lions. But offensively for Detroit, this is a matchup that if you're Pittsburgh, it's not one that necessarily favors you. Because we know what Detroit can look like when they're at their absolute peak. And we saw it. We've seen it countless times, but week 2 against the Bears, whenever they put up 50, and Jahmyr Gibbs, in one of his many performances of 3 scores, Amon-Ra St. Brown was playing out of his mind. And now over the last month or so, they've gotten Jamison Williams more involved since Dan Campbell took over as play caller. They're finding ways to, similar to the Rams, where what weapons they have, you know who their stars are, and you still can't stop it. Because Jahmyr Gibbs right now, you can make the argument best running back in football. He's got over 1,600 yards from scrimmage, 16 touchdowns. Matter of fact, I think that 1,600 number is low. He's got over 1,500 yards on the ground alone, I believe. So he's had a tremendous season so far. They still work in David Montgomery to an extent. Not as much as they did over the last 2 seasons. Jahmyr Gibbs has really become that top-notch guy there. And they, like I said, you know who their weapons are. You know how good Gibbs is. You can only hope to contain him rather than completely stop him. And that's going to be a challenge for the Steelers. And I think it was, who put this out there? It was either, I think it was Brian Batko of the Post-Gazette, who talked about how confusing the Steelers defense is because, they've slowed down Jonathan Taylor this year. They didn't allow Derrick Henry to get north of 100 yards. Devon Achane, who was incredibly hot coming into Monday night, only had 60 yards on the ground. But then they'll let, Kamani Vidal be a guy that just eats them up. And, the Jets run all over them. It's just a weird paradox, if that's the right word, that the Steelers have found themselves in this year, where they'll slow down the really good running backs, and then the guys you expect them to slow down just go off. Now, that's not without exception, because James Cook had a tremendous day against them, and the Bills ran for over 240 yards. So, it's not to say that they've slowed down every good running back that they faced. For the most part, though, they've done a pretty good job against the elite guys. And for the Lions, It's pretty crazy to think at this point in the season, the Lions and the Steelers have the same record, with the regard that we hold the Lions in and the lack of regard that we hold Pittsburgh in. And granted, they faced a more difficult schedule. And the vast majority of people would tell you that the Lions are a better team. And so would I. The Lions are a better team. But the fact that we're sitting here and both teams are 8-6, and Detroit is fighting for its playoff life at this point, there's going to be a level of desperation there. For the Steelers, there's no pressure on Pittsburgh. None at all. Because if they lose this game, all right, yeah, obviously you want to win it to be able to potentially put yourself in position to lock up the AFC North in Week 17. But if they lose, it's not the end of the world. For Detroit, if they lose, it very well is the end of the world. Because right now, the Green Bay Packers are 9-4-1. And they are currently the 7th seed, I believe, in the NFC. And so if you're the Lions, you can't really afford another loss at this point. You got to win out. And even then, winning out might not be enough. Because if all the other teams in front of them do the same, I mean, there's a world where they go 11-6 and don't make the postseason. So right now in the NFC, the Packers, yes, 9-4-1. They are the 7th seed. Green Bay at 8-6. I'm sorry, Detroit at 8-6 is the first team out. So the Lions right now have little room for error because Green Bay's 9-4-1. The 49ers are 10-4. And the Rams are 11-4. Those are the wild card teams right now. The NFC has been so deep this year, much more than we expected, where the Lions don't have a lot of wiggle room, even though they're 2 games above 500. And it looks like it's going to be an 8-team race. I guess Carolina's still technically in it because of how weird the NFC South is, and the Bucs and Panthers play each other this weekend. So whoever loses that game, I think we can pretty much consider out at that point. But if you're the Lions and you're a game and a half behind Green Bay for the final spot in the NFC playoffs, you lose this game, and if Green Bay wins against Chicago, hey, 2.5 games back at minimum of a playoff spot with 2 games remaining means you got to win your last 2 games. You got to get a lot of help. So the desperation factor does play against Pittsburgh a little bit here. The Lions are 6.5-point favorites. I would expect that number to climb before kickoff tomorrow because of Nick Herbig being out and because the Steelers are already without TJ Watt. It's just defensively, man, this doesn't feel like a good matchup for them. Especially when you think of the passing attack of the Lions. It's very much a 1-2-3, get rid of the ball to Amon-Ra, to Jameson Williams over the middle of the field, let them do the rest. It's very much it's just incredibly proficient how they attack their opponents. And you know that Amon-Ra is going to get his. You know that Jameson Williams is going to be a factor in some way, shape, or form. Jahmyr Gibbs, a dual threat out of the backfield. It's going to be a difficult game for them to win, on the road especially. Now, they haven't lost on the road to Detroit since 1998. That was that Thanksgiving game where the coin toss debacle took place, where Jerome Bettis called, it went heads, tails. It landed on heads because it landed on tails, but he said heads first. The Lions got the ball. They won the game. The Steelers lost out the rest of the way. And would this have been the last time they've played? In 2021? I believe that's the last time they played, was in 2021 in Pittsburgh. I was at that game. Fun fact, that's the only game I've ever gone to as a fan. I'm not a big go-to-game guy. I was never a big go-to-game guy as a fan. And so that's the only one I ever went to. And it was, in the 30s. It was raining. It was miserable. Ben didn't play that day because he got COVID. So it was Mason Rudolph against Jared Goff. It ended in a 16-16 tie. in the most like wasted 4 hours of my life. That was horrible. Now, we got free tickets that day, so me and a horde of my friends went, so I can't really complain too much about the free ticket part. But that was miserable. Do not recommend. Now, I know I've been talking about why it's a disadvantage for the Steelers against Detroit, but defensively, Detroit hasn't been very good. Since week 10, they're 25th in EPA. And for reference, they are one spot ahead of the Cowboys, one spot behind the Titans. So that tells you how bad their defense has been over the last 2 months. They just cannot get anything consistently going on that side of the ball in terms of slowing teams down. And even this past week against the Rams, look, the Rams are a very good team. So I'm not going to hold that against them per se. But, Dallas is still able to put up 30 against them. The Giants put up 27. They did slow down the Eagles in a loss. The Vikings put up 24. So, teams have been able to score pretty regularly against Detroit. They allowed 30 in a win over Baltimore. There's been multiple games where they've allowed a ton of points, but their own offense was able to outscore. Now, this past weekend wasn't the case because they allowed 41 in a loss to the Rams. Now, luckily for the Steelers, their offense has kind of come to life over the last 2 weeks. They put up 27 and 28 against the Ravens and the Dolphins. So their offense has shown capabilities of going out, putting up points. And if they're able to do that against Detroit and go tick for tack with the Lions offense, then they have a shot. If they can't put up points, I think this is going to be very similar to the Bills game. Or I should say very similar to the second half of the Bills game. Because Pittsburgh led in the first half going into halftime, and then the Joey Bosa strip sack, and then the dam just opened. But take what the second half of the game against the Bills looked like, multiply it by 2, and I think that if Pittsburgh can't score against the Lions, then the game gets away from them pretty quickly. Because got to be able to go tick for tack with a team like Detroit. They're going to put up points. That's just how it is. You're not going to limit. It's very rare that you limit Detroit to, not scoring a lot. And even when you do, like the game against Philadelphia, when they lost 16-9, they went for it, 6 times? 5 or 6 times and didn't convert one of them. Multiple times they were in scoring position. So they could have had far more points than they ended up with. It's just, the fact that that's who they are. That's who Dan Campbell is. They'll risk it for the biscuit. And sometimes they bite off a bit more than they can chew. So even when they don't score a ton of points like they did against Philadelphia back in week 11, they were still in position to do so, and just didn't because they failed on their 4th down conversions. This is a team that can put up points. 34 last week against the Rams, 44 the week prior against Dallas. I believe the only game, there's been 2 games that they've scored less than 24 points, 24 or fewer. And that was the game against Philadelphia and the loss to Kansas City where they scored 17. It looks like every other game they've scored at least 24 points. They're going to be able to score. I'm going to be intrigued to see how the Steelers divvy out the cornerback responsibilities, because Amon-Ra is largely a slot guy. So you're going to just put Brandon Echols on him? Or are you going to bring Jalen Ramsey down? Are you going to move Asante Samuel to the inside and kick Brandon Echols to the outside? There's a lot of different things that they could do, but I'm very intrigued to see how they deploy that. Now, it's not to say that Amon-Ra isn't only going to play on the slot, but he does spend a good portion of his time there. So that'll be something that I'm paying close attention to, is how they deploy which corners against Amon-Ra when he is inside. In terms of a prediction for this, I'm going to pick Detroit to win. Like I said, they're 6.5-point favorites. I think they win, and I think they cover. I think that this is maybe a 9 to 10-point win. I don't think it's a blowout per se. I don't think that the result's ever going to be in doubt too much. I just think that their firepower is much more than what Pittsburgh has to keep up with, where they have all-pro in Jahmyr Gibbs, all-pro in Amon-Ra, Jared Goff, who, when he is in rhythm and able to just get the ball out on time, in rhythm, within the, when they want to do that offensively, when he hits his back foot, just being able to get rid of the ball and do it efficiently. Detroit's an animal that you don't want to go up against. And I think we see a little bit of that on Sunday. I'll take Detroit to win 34-24. I think that is where I'll plant my flag in terms of how the game ends. And look, for Pittsburgh, defensively, they've been playing better. There's no doubt about that. I thought they did really well against Baltimore, all things considered. Lamar didn't play great. They did allow Keaton Mitchell to bust open a really long run. And I know the box score says, all right, they allowed over 200 yards on the ground. I think 60 of it was on that one run by itself. They didn't allow Derrick Henry to get north of 100 yards. I think largely they've done very well over the last couple weeks. Did very well against Miami. It was 28-3 in the fourth quarter. And then they got a couple garbage time touchdowns that meant nothing. In the first half against Buffalo, they kept the Bills out of the end zone in the first half and only allowed 16 offensive points for the Bills. So over the last 3 games, defensively, they've been playing very well. You even go back to week 10. They lost 25-10 to the Chargers, but the game was still in reach. The Chargers only had 15 points at the beginning of the fourth quarter. Offense just couldn't do anything. And then they rebounded and only allowed 12 to the Bengals. So since week 10, both of these defenses have kind of become polar opposites, where Detroit has been very bad. The Steelers have actually been pretty good. That said, the Lions have faced a lot of good teams this year with better defenses than the Steelers, and they've been able to put up points because they are a lethal offense with a bunch of really good players. And I just don't know if Pittsburgh, I do know that the Steelers don't have the guys that Detroit does. And that's okay to say. Kenneth Gainwell's been playing really well, but he's not Jahmyr Gibbs. DK's come alive over the last couple weeks, but he's yet to have a season where he's been as dominant as Amon-Ra. I trust Dan Campbell more than I trust Mike Tomlin. I trust the Lions more than I trust the Steelers right now. I think Detroit wins. And again, if Pittsburgh does lose, it's not the end of the world. They can lose their next 2 games, and as long as they win week 18, they win the division. So, that said, if you do win against the Lions and the Ravens lose to the Patriots, all of a sudden, week 17 against Cleveland, you win that game, and the division is wrapped up. Because remember, Baltimore's 7-7. And if Pittsburgh can get to 10 wins, that's the magic number right now. If Baltimore loses 1 game before week 18. So if they go 2-0 in this stretch before the final game of the year, and Baltimore goes 1-1, the Steelers win the division. So everybody who's a Steelers fan is also a New England Patriots fan this week. And if the Patriots can't pull off the win, then Baltimore goes on the road next week to Green Bay, and every Steelers fan then becomes a Green Bay Packers fan. Especially, if the Steelers win this week. Because if the Steelers lose and the Ravens win, then next week genuinely doesn't mean a thing. No team can clinch. No team can be eliminated in week 17. If Baltimore wins and the Steelers lose, which is possible, the Ravens are favored by 2.5. If the Ravens win and the Steelers lose, week 17 for both teams is meaningless. Week 18 is for the division. So I'll be intrigued to see how both teams address that. The Steelers rest some guys. It's pretty rare that you see something like that where a week 17 game between two teams fighting for the division means nothing because they play each other in the final week of the year. They got the same record, and that's what it's going to come down to. So I would be intrigued to see how both teams would address it. Would the Steelers maybe rest Aaron Rodgers? Would some defensive starters maybe get the week off? Or even not the week off. Would they treat it kind of like a preseason game? Would they have guys play the first quarter and then pull them? Maybe. And for guys that are recovering, they're not going to rush TJ back. They're not going to rush Nick Herbig back. If the game doesn't mean anything, there's no reason to. So I'll be incredibly intrigued to see how the Steelers attack that. And the Ravens, for that matter. Are they going to give Lamar the week off? I think that makes the most sense. If Pittsburgh loses and Baltimore wins, I wouldn't play Lamar in week 17. Why would you? He's clearly not 100% already. And if you can go a week without him taking any sort of toll on his body, yeah, give him the week off. So I think both teams could treat week 17, if that is how the cookie crumbles. Yeah, just treat it basically like an exhibition at that point. Put some backups out there. Maybe the Steelers get a look at Will Howard. So I'm intrigued. I would be very intrigued. Got some comments here. Matt says the game will be won in the trenches. How does Pittsburgh's defensive line look against Detroit's offensive line? That's the big thing. I'll say this though. Like Jahmyr Gibbs is just so much of a threat as a receiver as well as a running back. And when it comes to these outside runs where you've got one of the two tackles pulling for the Lions, whether it's Penny Sewell or their tackle on the right side, or on the left side, excuse me, they're just so dynamic when it comes to the run game where I don't expect the Steelers to completely shut them down. Like the Lions are going to get theirs. But we'll see. We'll see. Game will be won if Aaron can put up 40 because the Lions defense sucks. Well, yeah, Lions defense hasn't been very good. Like I said, 25th in EPA per play since week 10. I don't know if the Steelers can put up 40. I just don't think that they just don't have the horses to get there. But I'd be interesting. I'd be interested to see. I'd love to see if they could. I mean, they did it last year against Cincinnati. Maybe they can this year. I would love the Steelers to make the playoffs, to play the Texans and lose, so then there's no choice but to get rid of Mike Tomlin. Look, if they make the postseason, obviously I'm going to root for them to win. Yeah, I mean, look, man, the Tomlin stuff, it's not going away. He's not going away. I'd be shocked if he did. And if he does, it's because he requests out and they trade him and he agrees to go somewhere else. I don't think they're going to fire him. And whether that's right or wrong, I mean, I've been pretty explicit with my thoughts on here, saying that I think it's time to move on. And look, if they get to the postseason again and they don't win a playoff game, then yeah, I think that they should part ways. That said, like I know the Texans' defense is very good. Their offense, it's beatable. So I don't think that Houston coming to Pittsburgh would be a guaranteed loss for the Steelers. Houston's good. I'm not saying that they're not. And Stroud's awesome. Nico Collins is very good. But I don't think it would be a blowout. The Texans rarely blow teams out. Most of their games are close, one score. They blew out the Cardinals a few weeks ago and put up 40. But like against good teams, it's pretty rare that we see Houston just blow teams out. So I think that game would actually be close and the Steelers have a decent chance to win it, personally. Noah asks, You think they're still drafting a quarterback with how this draft class is looking? Yeah, I would say so. They're not going to be in range for Fernando Mendoza. They're not going to be in range for Dante Moore, more than likely. But I'm also not going to pretend to be a college football expert. I'm not going to pretend to be a draft expert. Every year there's a guy or two who like randomly ascend into the first round from like the Senior Bowl to the draft. 2 years ago at this point, nobody was really regarding, a Bo Nix or Michael Penix going in the top 10 to 15. And, they both went in the top 15. Jackson Dart at this point last year was a guy that was getting projected in the third round and he went at the end of the first. So like there's going to be some guy that climbs boards that'll be available, whether the Steelers trade up into like the top 12 or if they sit and wait at like 20, 21, 22, wherever they pick, and take a guy that's there. I would prefer them to be aggressive if there's a guy that they really like and, he's climbed up boards and whatnot. But yeah, there's been a lot of guys who, like Lenora Sellers going back to school. The Sorsby kid from Cincinnati going back to school. Ty Simpson hasn't looked great. So there's a little bit of questions there if you want to take him in the first round. But I think he's a name that's possible that they take. But yeah, I still think it's going to be a quarterback. I'd be pretty shocked if it's not. And while there's going to be people who are arguing against that, like, oh, you can wait to take a quarterback. Next year's will be great. They say that about every quarterback class as of late, right? Where 2026 was supposed to be, a generational class. And then all the dudes that were talked about at the top of it weren't good. Cade Klubnik didn't have a good year. Drew Aller didn't have a good year and he got hurt. Sellers didn't have a great year. He's going back to school. So, for the most part, every year I was like, oh no, this quarterback class, it's great. Well, we've heard that a lot. Now, there's an argument also to be said from a fan perspective, like, all right, do we want this current staff, this current regime to get their hands on the next quarterback? I personally don't. I don't want to see Mike Tomlin with a new quarterback because he just doesn't have a modern eye for football, a modern eye for offense. So it's really a catch-22 situation where, I think that they should draft a quarterback, but I don't want Mike Tomlin to be the guy who leads them into this like new era with a new quarterback, because it's just the game's passed him by in a lot of ways. And the X's and O's of offense, the game has certainly passed him by. So I don't want that to be an issue that the quarterback has to deal with. So it's hard. It's hard to, weigh those options there. But I guess that was a long-winded way of me saying, I still think that they'll take a quarterback. We'll be back on Monday to recap Steelers-Lions, as well as the entirety of Week 16. There's no Week 16 preview show this week. I, as I'm sure many of you, really just getting set for Christmas, did the recap show for the Pump Fake, didn't do the preview show for this week because, doing all of this last week, Christmas shopping and getting stuff together, just focusing all my time on that these last couple of days. So if you're wondering, hey, there wasn't a preview show, that's why. But we'll have Steelers-Lions recap on Monday and a full Week 16 recap as well on the Pump Fake. And then, that'll be the final shows before Christmas on Monday. So if you're watching, please be sure to subscribe. If you are listening, please be sure to comment, leave a review, as well as you're watching, like the video, do all that good YouTube stuff. It helps out. Really, really does. Even if you don't think it does, it really does. So appreciate everybody for watching, and we'll be back on Monday here on Believe in Steelers.